right now to talk about Washington's response so far is Texas Congressman Michael McCaul. He's the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, which oversees the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. Sir, good to see you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me, Maria.
Give us an update, sir. What can you tell us in terms of FEMA's response and what needs to be done now?
Well, first, let me applaud my governor and the president for immediately, even before the hurricane hit, declaring major disaster areas. And that allows, why is that important? Because that allows FEMA to come in and provide the assistance in advance. And that's something after Katrina and Rita we saw didn't work so well. I passed a bill in the Congress to deal with that very issue. And I think this has been one of the best responses to one of the worst hurricanes that I've seen in my lifetime hit the coast of Texas.
You know, I know that Texas is such an important part of the U.S. economy, so you have to believe that this disaster is going to impact the broad economy as well. Obviously, the loss of life is most important, but putting that aside for a moment and looking at the broad economic impact, how do you see it?
Well, loss of life is the highest priority. We've deployed search and rescue teams, Coast Guard, both air and water. The National Guard's been activated. You know, my grandfather, survived the 1900 hurricane of Galveston, where 10,000 people died in that hurricane. I think we have handled this obviously far better than that. But from an economic standpoint, as you point out, Maria, we're going to see some serious economic damage. All the ports in Houston, with the exception of Brownsville, have been shut down, including the Houston shipping channel, which involves a lot of energy and commerce. And also, just when you look at Houston, which got hit so hard last night in many parts of my district with this flooding, you're going to see a lot of economic damage there. And that's where, you know, I've been talking to FEMA, talking to our state emergency manager to make sure those assets are on the ground to assist in this recovery.
Yeah, and you sent a letter to the president urging his authorization of the governor's request for the disaster declaration. That was pretty fast approval there. Tell us about this major disaster declaration for Texas. It triggers the release of federal funds to help with this individuals and communities with the disaster. Where does that money come from?
Well, once it is declared a major disaster, then that's when FEMA assistance is allowed to come in. That's why that was so important to do early on. And again, I applaud the president for doing that. Just last night, Harris County, that being Houston, was declared a major disaster recovery area, which will allow FEMA assistance to now go in. They've been pre-positioned, the assets and personnel, but now with this declaration in Houston, after what we saw last night, now we'll see that money come in, both in terms of basically rescue operations, food, water, and a lot of public safety assistance. I think first and foremost is saving lives, and that's what we're doing.
So there was so much discussion about the administration's proposed budget cutting, making budget cuts to FEMA, and yet the president was incredibly quick to respond here in terms of unleashing that needed money.
Well, I think there's no more, you know, whether it's a man-made terrorist event or a natural disaster, no a major event like that should, I mean, we have a role in the federal government to play here, whether it happened in New Jersey or Louisiana with Katrina or now here in Texas. So we do have a disaster recovery relief fund. Right now, the economic costs are in the billions. It's foreseeable that those funds may be depleted. And one of the first things we do when we get back into Congress after the August recess maybe to be looking at an emergency supplemental to help pay for this assistance to the people of the great state of Texas.
Yeah, you make a great point, Congressman, because you're going to be getting back to a lot of really fast deadlines in terms of the debt ceiling, in terms of the budget, and then in terms of getting policy done. Can you walk us through what that first couple of weeks looks like when Congress gets back in a week?
Well, I mean, we're looking at bold tax reform. We want to get that piece done. I hope the Senate will go back and take a look at health care reform. We have a debt ceiling. We have threats of shutting the government down. I think, you know, we have funding. We have all major appropriations bills coming out of the House. In September, they'll be going over to the Senate. And it's my sincere hope the Senate will entertain these Republican appropriations bills, including funding for the wall, which I know is so important to the president.
I think it's such an important point that you make, these appropriations Are they going to get all messed up now, Congressman, because the left is trying to put new amendments about taking Confederate statues down? Is this more obstructionism of the president's agenda?
Yeah, we're trying to stay on message. The statues is one issue. I think what happened in Charlottesville needs to be condemned. I will be having a hearing after 9/11 on both worldwide terrorism threats from radical Islam, but also from domestic terrorism of neo-Nazis and white supremacists. But let's not get too off message. We have a lot on our plate to deal with what the American people want us to respond to, whether it be health care, taxes, border security, and national security.
Yeah, and I'm confident that you've got all of your ducks in order on all of that, but people recognize that there's only a little time left, and now this disaster. What do the next couple of days and months look like, Mr. Chairman, in terms of Texas and the impact? I know we really don't know because we're getting more rain in Houston this week.
Right, and we're expecting 1 to 2 more feet of rain in Houston. It's not capable of handling that kind of rain. We're going to see major flooding, major disaster. We don't want to see loss of life. That's our #1 priority. The rescue teams are already deployed and out there. But, this is a very of historic proportions in the sense that it's a Category 4 hurricane. It hovers over the coast of Texas and then stays there and then drops enormous amounts of rain that the coastal cities cannot absorb. And therefore, you're going to have major flooding, major damage, and hopefully not more loss of life.
And I know that most of those homes, or a big portion of the homes, actually don't even have flood insurance because they're right there on the coast.
And that is what FEMA is designed to do. FEMA is not the operational arm to come in. That is state and locals. But FEMA comes in and provides the assistance needed after the event. They're coming in right now to provide individual assistance, but individual assistance with housing and recovery assistance and moving debris. We would like to see people return to their homes and not have to bring in these prefab homes like what we saw with Katrina, although that is one of the contingency plans that we are looking at right now.
Yeah. All right, Congressman, good to have you on the program this morning. Thanks very much for your insights. We appreciate your time.
No, thanks, Maria.
And thank you for your leadership, Congressman Michael McCaul, joining us there. The White House